It's 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. The house is quiet. No one is asking where the remote is. No one is telling him dinner is cold. And for the guy sitting in this living room, he is perfectly fine with that. His life operates entirely on his own schedule. If he wants to spend the evening restoring a motorcycle or deep in a woodworking project, there is no one to negotiate with. The money, routine, and silence are his alone. People on the outside often look at this unpartnered lifestyle and assume something is missing. They see a gap where a family should be. But for the man in the house, the lack of compromise feels like the definition of freedom. This chart uses 2021 census data to show the scale of this shift. It shows that 65% of single midlife men in the U.S. now live alone. In the 50 to 60 age bracket, nearly half have never been married. This isolated lifestyle is no longer an anomaly. For a vast portion of an entire generation, the quiet, solo kingdom is the defining physical reality of their middle age. But that same silence carries a quantifiable cost. This chart maps suicide rates for adults 40 to 60. The multiplier for divorced men is 8 times higher than for divorced women. The 2025 Sigma report shows a similar trend. 60% of Gen X adults meet the criteria for being lonely. These statistics exist alongside high-functioning adult lives. These men have the houses, the cars, and the stable jobs. They have curated routines that allow them to move through the world looking like they have everything under control. This group is also the least likely to admit they are struggling. When the isolation gets heavy, they tend to deflect. They will talk for hours about a project or a game, but they will change the subject the moment the conversation turns toward their own isolation. This isolation is a side effect of the exact generational programming that allowed them to be successful. The same wiring that makes them independent also makes them vulnerable. For Generation X, self-reliance was a requirement for survival. Society didn't just encourage them to handle things on their own, it mandated it. They were raised in an environment of hands-off parenting and unsupervised neighborhoods. They were conditioned to fix their own problems and navigate their own world without asking for directions or emotional support. As adults, that childhood conditioning becomes a rigid set of rules. For these men, the act of asking for help, whether it's with a home repair or a mental health crisis, is interpreted as a fundamental failure of their character. These men are functioning exactly the way they were built. They are equipped to survive in a quiet house, but they lack the tools to build a bridge back toward human connection. There are 3 main paths to this solo living. The first is shown here, the never married demographic. Midlife adults who never walked down the aisle jumped from 7% in 1970 to 29% by 2020. The second path involves the LGBTQ+ community. Gay and bisexual Gen X men are twice as likely to live alone as their straight peers, and 4 times as likely to reach middle age without children. This isolation is often rooted in the 1980s and 90s. This generation lived through the AIDS crisis, which decimated their social circles and friend groups just as they were entering adulthood. Many of these men live alone because the partners and peers they expected to grow old with did not survive that era. They are the survivors of a social infrastructure that was torn apart decades ago. The third path is divorce. Historically, the wife in a traditional marriage served as the social architect. She was the one who maintained the friendships, scheduled the dinners, and kept the family connected to the outside world. Researchers call this the load-bearing wall theory. When the marriage ends, the man doesn't just lose a spouse, he loses the person who managed his entire social existence. Without her, his connection to other people often collapses. Whether they never married or lost their social architect, the result is the same: the total absence of a functioning system to keep them connected to others. This generation does value friendship. 95. This diagram illustrates how men typically connect, shoulder to shoulder. They build bonds through shared tasks or activities, whereas women tend to connect face-to-face through direct, vulnerable conversation. 2 men might spend hours together working on a car or watching a game. They will talk about sports, politics, and music with high passion, but they will go weeks without mentioning that they feel isolated or overwhelmed. This wiring fails when life changes. When a friend moves away or the shared activities stop, these men lack the habit of checking in just to talk. Without a task to perform together, the connection often fades into silence. Because they were never taught to maintain unprompted emotional connections, even 30-year friendships can go dormant. They wait for a reason to call, and eventually the phone stops ringing entirely. Living alone can feel like a victory on a clean, quiet Saturday afternoon. The bat version of freedom eventually meets the reality of aging, a medical emergency with no one in the waiting room, or a holiday that passes in total silence. Extreme independence has a shelf life. Eventually, the question shifts from whether a man enjoys his freedom to whether anyone would actually know if something happened to him. The ability to thrive solo is a hallmark of this generation's wiring. These men are experts at survival, but sheer survival is not a substitute for human connection. This AARP data shows a trend that suggests a path forward. Loneliness metrics actually trend downward as this demographic moves from their 50s into their 60s and 70s. For the guy in the quiet house right now, the solution isn't to join a community group or hobby club that doesn't fit his personality. That kind of forced interaction is rarely the answer for someone built on self-reliance. The more effective move is to use that resolve to make one unprompted phone call. Call the friend you haven't spoken to in 3 years. You don't need a project to discuss or a reason to check in. Make the call because 3 years is too long. And remember that the guy on the other end of the line is likely sitting in his own quiet house,